Hey everyone, I'm Nick and welcome back to the channel. Last time we took a look at the $850 Supercharged Range Rover I bought and saw there's a little bit of work to do. Okay, so maybe there's a lot of work to do. We actually haven't started the engine yet because the radiator and some of the hoses got pushed back into the accessory belts. We really don't want to damage this engine by starting it without going through the cooling system, so we might as well start up front and figure out what needs to be replaced. So we're back at the front and we've removed the center section of the cowling, which actually houses the cabin air filter, which looks to be in very good shape. And that's, you actually service that from the top, so you don't actually have to remove this, but it's held in with two nuts, and they go there and right behind the ABS block right there, and then you pull forward and up, and it's heavier than it looks. Now we're going to pull this off so we can try to get this fan cowl off and then see what's going on in there. To remove this cover, there's two 8mm bolts, I think, so two small bolts. And then we have to remove the oil cap. Looks good. And there's our supercharger.
This is into a supercharger.
Oh yeah, these are the intercoolers. Yeah, I forgot. Yep, the intercoolers are here. And the supercharger part is underneath in there.
I wonder if anyone sells a less baffled version of this.
Yeah, so these baffles are intake tuning for the sound or usually silencing. I've seen videos of how this sounds, but this one hasn't run yet in our ownership. But it would be interesting to see what other options there are. Okay, so let's see about getting this out. So actually, because of where this cooler is placed, you don't have to take the shroud off, but you can kind of see in there, hopefully, that silver cooler pushed in. We've got a hose over there touching the tensioner, which looks to be in decent shape. There are lots of hoses in here that are kind of pushed into places they shouldn't be. What it looks like to me is that this is one of the holders, and then in the middle we saw like a little pad that's supposed to be between the radiator and the mounting point, and that was like shifted, so it's partially out. So we'll have to see. But really, it looks like the coolant is coming out of that, or one of the hoses coming off along this. So it looks like there's a lot of extra piping compared to the 4.4 because we got water to air intercoolers right here. So that could be part of it. So we know we have an issue with the cooling system on this truck. We saw a little bit of leak from one of the hoses between the radiator and the block, and we actually noticed there's probably a leak from one of the end tanks of the radiator itself, so we're gonna have to replace it. So the first step when you're working on your cooling system, anytime you're gonna have to open it up, it's gonna be to drain it. So we're gonna do that. To drain the coolant, there's a drain plug at the bottom of the radiator on the passenger side, the right side of the truck in direction of travel. And we're gonna unplug that and let it drain into a bucket. So the first step is really gonna be to make sure your coolant fill cap is open so that it can drain out. I'm gonna get under there and get that open. I already have a bucket, so I'll be trying to catch the coolant in here and avoid making a big mess. Now, once you're down here on the passenger side, once you've removed your front plate, or skid plate that goes in here, right here is the drain plug. So depending on how tight that is, either you could use pliers. I'm gonna try a screwdriver, so we'll see how that goes. This, you probably won't have this on your truck. This is extra wiring for some fog light or extra off-roading lights. I'm gonna put my bucket here. Unfortunately, the way this is set up is it's probably gonna drip onto this frame, so hopefully it won't spread out too far. I don't have a hose that will fit on here, because otherwise I would just put the hose there and run it into the bucket. No, you know, we'll hope for the best. Okay, this stubby screwdriver is not gonna do it because of these hoses here, which are, ooh, auxiliary radiators. Very interesting. Oh, one auxiliary radiator. I didn't realize that was there. Very cool. Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm gonna keep myself out of the way. I'm gonna get some drips. Starting. Now you'll notice that this coolant is green, which is not the standard coolant for these trucks. Normally it's like an orange color. So this tells me that this truck has had its coolant replaced at some point in its life, which is, there's nothing wrong with having a different color. You just have to make sure it's completely flushed out so it doesn't mix. Though admittedly a lot of these coolants are described as compatible with these systems and mixing them shouldn't be a problem, but usually you want to have like some consistency. Alright, so we'll let this drain out and we'll report back. As a quick note, if you want to speed up the process of draining, this plug here, if you loosen it, will speed it up a lot, because this is part of the loop for the cooling, and it was I noticed that it was bubbling in here, and so opening this up sped everything up. Now while we drain the coolant from the system, we can start removing some stuff to get access to the fan, and that's going to involve removing this section of the intake. So this goes from the air box to the intake, which is where the supercharger is, and we've got two clamps right here, and that should be what we need. We also have a breather hose, probably part of the PCV system, that goes into the intake here, so we're gonna have to pop this off. Just squeeze and pull, and then it's just, I think these are 7mm on mine, but you can use a screwdriver too. Yeah, that's convenient. Looks nice and clean in here. That's good. So this intake just runs straight back there, and it loops back into the supercharger, which is right here. And this is where the shaft is, and that belt drives the supercharger. Right here we have this fan shroud, and this is actually clipped in to the radiator itself with these little pin clips. So these are really small, so you want to be careful that you don't damage them when you remove them. The way they work is there's a central shaft in it, and that's like this pin here, right here. So you want to essentially pull that forward so that the retaining barbs can squeeze together. So you have to pull it up pretty far, probably, maybe even all the way, but you want to be careful because it's really thin. Since you have the pin pulled out, might feel, yep, you can just pull that forward, get it out, don't lose it. And now normally this AC line actually mounts here and here, but since we know our radiator got tweaked, these popped out. We may even at some point have to bend this slightly back into shape, but we'll figure that out when we get to it. So next is going to be to get this shroud out. Right here we have a connector that we're going to want to disconnect. That is what connects the fan clutch. So the fan is driven by the belt, but there's an electronic clutch that they will control its speed or let it run or not. The way it usually works is it fails on, so if your fan clutch fails, it'll just always run. That way the engine doesn't overheat. That's kind of in contrast to a electric fan, which when it fails, it just doesn't run. So, you know, a nice redundancy for these engines. And the reason we're taking this connector out is because it goes through the shroud and we don't want it to get stuck when we're removing it. Now we're back under the truck. There's actually a third pin right here that we want to remove as well. This one was already partially released, so I'm going to pop that out. And that, okay, there is a hose hooked in here as well. Okay, that one. There we go. That should allow us to slide that up. But I am noticing that there is still something preventing us from moving this up. It turns out there's a screw that connects the main fan shroud to the portion of the shroud that holds the two coolers, so we'll have to remove it first. It might be a little bit of a challenge here since there's even less space than normal with everything moved towards the engine. Oh, something fun to note here. This belt is shredded. I think when things pulled forward, it actually ripped a whole part of the belt off. So no matter what, we're replacing that belt. Now there was a screw holding the shroud in addition to the 3 pins. So after some tedious unscrewing with my little 1/4 inch ratcheting wrench and T25, I was able to get it out. It should be easier if your radiator's not pushed in. It is frustrating that this is how I have to do it, but we're okay now. Next, I'm removing the other screw, and I'll show you where they are on the shroud when I get it out. So next, since the shroud goes all the way around the fan, we have to unscrew the fan. So we need a 36mm wrench here. That's gonna go in, and then I have a holder that will hold onto the water pump bolts. Now here I have my water pump bolt tool. So this will grab the water pump pulley by the bolts, and depending on which way you want to turn, you want to look at how this is oriented. So if you hook it in this way, you'll prevent the pulley from turning that way. If you put it in this way, it'll prevent it from turning that way. Okay, so we have, the 4.4 and the 4.2 supercharged fans spin in different opposite directions. So in the 4.4, it would be reverse threaded, but on this one it's regular. So we want to pull left to loosen, which means we want to have this resist that way. So I've oriented the pulley so the 2 bolts are facing the top. And I sprayed it with PB Blaster. Now, if you want to spray something with PB Blaster, there's all the belts around, but I know I'm replacing the belts, so it's not a big deal if it gets on there for me. But if for whatever reason you are not replacing your belts, be careful about spraying that kind of stuff on. The fan was on really tight, so I had to get some help and knock it loose with a mallet. You just grab you can spin it with the fan blades. And we're gonna go slowly because if you want to reuse the radiator, you don't want the fan to fall out and smash into it and cause any leaks. So look in, keep an eye on the bolt or nut, I guess, that the fan screws in with. And then you want it to drop into the fan shroud. Okay, that's out, okay. So the issue is this AC line is super in the way. It turns out that the official procedure is to evacuate the AC system, remove the line, and then remove the shroud, and refill the system after everything's back together. But instead of doing that, I'm gonna struggle. Now the driver's side of the radiator, this isolator was partially stuck out. Just to pull it out of the way, that gives us a little bit more movement. Of course, working on a car that's been crashed presents additional challenges over the regular procedure. So have a little more movement here. I'm gonna try to get this shroud out, but this AC line is still kind of in the way. So to remove the shroud, you gotta remove a couple hoses. There's this main one that goes here, and that's hard plastic up to here, which is like a rubber hose. And then there's this one here. Probably also gonna have to remove this tank. For this, we're gonna have to remove this clamp here, this clamp here. This slides out with the screwdriver, and then this one back here with one of those clamp tools. You can squeeze it and slide it off. So we're gonna get started on that. So we've loosened this clamp, that's up, that one's over and out. for the coolant reservoir. There's two 8mm bolts holding it in. There's also a hose right here, which I will probably leave on for now, because hopefully just lifting this out of the way will give me enough room to pull this hose off. So let's see, this is held on with those two bolts, and then there's a clip in here it slots into. Well, not a clip, but it slots onto a little mount, a little rubber mount. Ow! Ooh, good thing I had gloves on. Frees up some room. All right, we pulled this hose out that way, and then we were able to slide this one off here. So this should be just about enough out of the way, and I can pull this out. Better fan. We have our fan shroud here. We look from the top. We have our two pins that go here. There's a Torx screw that goes through here, and another one that goes through here. I will fix this. And then at the bottom, right there, is where the last pin goes. And you'll have to be careful beforehand to unhook the two hoses that hook in here. That way you can lift it out. It'd be nice if this were split, so you could just take the top half out. We finally reached a milestone here, which is to see what happened. I'll look around, it looks like, trying to figure out what ran into the belt, because the inner belt, as you can see here, is missing a whole piece. It's thinner than it should be. So yeah, it looks like we have a leak here in this area. Yeah, that's all wet. So it's gotta be down there that something hit the belt and shredded it. So looking in here, I was trying to figure out what those two coolers are. So we have this one up top, and then there's another one down at the bottom. And so both of these have the plastic connectors like this going in, and those are coolant. And on the top one, this is a coolant to transmission fluid cooler. So these two, there's two lines on the outside here, and those go to the transmission. And at the bottom, that's the one of the oil coolers. So it goes to where the filter is, and then another line goes over to the side in front of the wheel, back there, where there is a secondary oil cooler. And that's because having a supercharger, putting a lot more heat in the oil, so that's why there's a secondary cooler. Now, since we know this all got pushed in towards the belts, we're gonna wanna figure out which part of it is leaking, because it certainly seems like one of these plastic couplers or T's or Y's or however many inputs and outputs there are may have cracked and was leaking down. Both of these are all set up with the wire kind of like this. We pull the wire out so it doesn't grip on there anymore, and that's just the same thing down there in a smaller size. I want to look at this top connector, the one below, and then this junction in here. So right here we have the hose I took out. It faces this way. There's that, it's connected to that coolant manifold up top that's metal. This goes to, oh wait, no, it goes this way. This goes to the transmission cooler. This goes to the oil cooler, and this is another line that goes over to the passenger side. So far this looks fine. I'll have to clean it up, try this up, make sure it looks like there's no issues. But so far it looks like this didn't impact anything that was turning. So this section may be okay. This is secured with 3 of these metal wire guys. And then there's the other hose that goes down has a one of these clamps, so I pulled that off, or slid it down and then wiggled it off, and I was able to take this whole section out. Now, in here, may certainly have more room to work in. What I'm going to try to do is remove this piece here, which connects to this cooler, the other cooler, and then goes down into a T that goes to one line returns up here, and the other connects to the bottom corner of the radiator. So I'm going to try to get that segment out. That's held in with 2 of those wire systems to secure it, or 1 on each cooler, and then there's a screw clamp at the bottom of this hose. And this is the other manifold thing. This piece definitely got scraped, but I don't know if it compromised it. I'm not sure. I have to look around some more when it's dry. I was hoping to get more of a smoking gun type situation where I'd be able to see the culprit immediately. We are not there. No. So now the hoses that go to the coolers out. We're gonna actually remove the radiator. So to do that, we have to separate this, which we'll figure out. And then there are 2 hoses. One that comes from here, goes to the side, and then there's another one below it that actually connects to one of the sets of hoses we took out. These are the same as this type, with the metal clip that you pull out to release it. And we can reach this one from this side, and once that one's off, we'll be able to see the bottom one, and maybe we'll have to go from the bottom, but we'll figure that out. I was able to work this off. I ended up removing it from right here as well, that way it can just be out of the way. And then the bottom hose below is right here, same thing. I was actually able to push up the sides of the wire from the bottom and then pull it out. Now this, we removed one of the screws here. The rest just slots in at the bottom, so you can lift it up and forward. This is the slot where that second part of the shield goes in. Right here is another slot. And those are 2 ports for the hoses we took off. Next, we want to unscrew the plastic retainers that prevent the radiator assembly from tipping towards the engine. In this case, the one on the driver's side was broken in the accident. So on the ends, we got these guys that hold the radiator to the whole assembly. So I'm going to see there's a little tab right here, which you can pull back and then lift that out. And do that on this side too. So as you push the radiator forward, release that. I'll need to use both hands to remove this one, but once it's off, we'll be able to slide the radiator up and out. The issue we're running into here is that you see that lip there? That catches where those connections are. Now we have to lift it out. So I did, I moved that end forward, and that should allow us to grab this up and over and off. And that's it. Okay, there we go.
It looks pretty decent.
Nope. Oop. Whoop.
Yeah, you can see where it's leaking.
Yeah. Don't get coolant on your stuff. Land Rover actually says to clean off any coolant that gets on the engine block, since it can cause damage to the finish. I'm not sure if that's also the case with the green coolant in this truck, but we'll play it safe and clean off what we got onto the paint. So this whole area looks like it was leaking just out of here. It's not terrible, but definitely not a bad time to replace it, especially since we're not completely sure it's not leaking. We'll be better off with a fresh one. Now that we've removed all that, we have good view onto the belt. So right here, there's supposed to be another spine on that belt. This is ripped up. It's a good thing we're getting in here. So we now have the cooling system disassembled, and we can see where all the leaks were coming from. Disassembling it was harder than it would have been if the truck hadn't been in an accident, so if you're just looking to do basic cooling system maintenance, things should be a lot easier to work on. While we didn't see any obvious accident damage like broken piping or cracked plastic, we did find a leak from the radiator. I also have a theory that the force of the accident and the movement of the radiator and coolers was the last straw for the old O-rings and the connectors, which are a pretty common failure point with age. Once the stiff and somewhat flattened O-rings were disturbed, they started to let coolant seep out. To protect the engine, we're going to replace the radiator, the hoses, and the coolant. So next week, we're going to start putting this thing back together and see if we can't get the engine started to find out if we have a good truck or just another dud. Let me know what you think in the comments. Is this truck going to be a great deal, or is this a bad idea that's going to burn money like a bank on fire? If you want to keep up with this rebuild and maybe check out some other broken European cars I've put back on the road, subscribe. If you're enjoying this series, don't forget to leave a like. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.